Alright, hello. My name is Lori. This is Hylics to All TVs. If you haven't seen any percent, this game is a turn-based RPG with a very wacky and wonderful art style, and the game is very broken. This category goes through the effort of collecting the 9 extra gestures or combat skills in the game, where any percent usually only collects 1 and just runs to the end of the game with it. This actually requires doing a lot of cool side content in the game, so I'm going to start showing that off. Time starts right as soon as we hit new game on the title screen. So to start off, this game is pretty weird, but the gameplay itself is not too abnormal. You know, it's just an isometric world map with turn-based combat when we actually get into combat, which is gonna be quite a while in this run. We do a lot of setup before the battles in this game due to a lot of glitches that allow us to get a lot of really good items really, really early. So starting off, we go to the town of New Moldal, and our first goal is to unlock our first party member and also do our first major sequence break of the run. So as soon as I make it to the palace in the top right here, we're going to get our first objective that the king is missing from Hongwarma, and he's going to join our party and give us the ability to air dash. And with the air dash, we can immediately kind of do some very silly things with the game. So I'm going to go up here, and then jump from here and dash to the right, and then make a save and load that save in midair. And the reason I do this is because we have an item in our inventory called the Mini Crystal, which is supposed to be like a soft lock prevention item. It lets us work to the last loading zone we touch, or the initial spawn point, which is just way out to the starting area of the game. But the way the last spawn point works is that it just takes you to the last time that your game loaded anywhere, which, if we just load a save, we can put that position anywhere we want. And then if we use the mini crystal while we're on the ground, and the place the mini crystal puts us is in the air, we can jump out of the air because the game doesn't instantly recognize that we're not on the ground anymore. So we use that to break into that treasure vault early and get some very good items. And then we finally get our first TD in the run, which we could have gotten like literally 10 seconds in, but we wait a little bit until we have the air dash just to have slightly faster movement. Barometer Bleb is not a skill we're going to be using at all, unfortunately. It's just like a really alright healing spell, but not only is there a character who has a skill that lets them heal whoever they want instead of just Barometer Bleb forcing you to heal yourself, I believe, but it's also just like not the strongest as a healing spell. We have a healing item we're going to get that kind of just does everything that Barometer Bleb does a little bit better, and it's a consumable, so it doesn't cost any MP. I'm in the first dungeon area of the game here, Viewax's Edifice, and I get to do the first major side quest thing here, which is grab the first Sage token. The big crux of all TVs is that this game's like ultimate reward for doing most of its side quests is a TV with an ultimate skill. So the main reason this run is like majorly longer than any percent is because of how much time getting that TV takes. But for now, we're gonna kind of run through the first area of the game here. By that I mean I'm gonna skip all of it. In this jail cell is the king that you usually have to free him by beating the first boss, but instead what I can do is I can use this piece of geometry here to land on top of the jail cells, and then just talk to him, and that will warp him back to the palace in the main town. Usually, what you have to do in this part of the run is like, or this part of the game rather, is go all the way up this like palace castle, fight a boss, and then come all the way back down with a key that you get from the boss in order to open these jail cells. But we get the king activated from behind the jail cells, as well as get the TV in that area with time sigil, and then we can warp out of there. We've done everything we need to do in that area. That TV, Time Sigil, unfortunately, is another one we're just not going to use, like, ever. But that dynamic is about to change. The next TV we're going to unlock here is the most important skill in the game, potentially. It's the only one of the 9 TVs we actually get in an any percent run, and it's really, like, easy and quick to grab and really fast. I'm going to give a juice box to this guy down here, and he's going to give me the house key, which we can use to unlock a house here in the town and get Soul Crisper, which is an incredibly good skill. It does damage equal to just your base attack stat, and also lights the enemy on fire, which is just a really good damage over time. Damage over time is, like, the big thing in this game. We're going to be fighting bosses, and any fight we do is going to be done by just, like, stacking damage over time debuffs on them and watching them slowly, like, die super, like, every time they take a turn. So here I'm doing a cutscene skip. I stored the control menu and started a cutscene so that after the cutscene started, I would still have access to the control menu, and by then using up that stored control menu, the game is put in a state where it thinks I'm actionable when I'm not supposed to be, so it gives me access to all my buttons, like my pause button, and when, you know, I am in a state like that, and I use the mini crystal, the game takes me out of the cutscene, and it just warps me back using the mini crystal. And since pretty much every cutscene in this game, it doesn't have the trigger tied to the cutscene. Usually the trigger of the thing that happens to the cutscene is tied to the event before the cutscene. It means we just don't have to watch cutscenes, but everything that would usually happen as a result of a cutscene still happens. So, the point of that cutscene is I have to watch it right after getting the key to the airship, but we can skip it, and we get the key to the airship before the point in the cutscene that we would need to skip, so it just saves a lot of time of not having to watch that. And with the airship, we're going to do a few things first off, and the first thing we do, actually, is this little arcade minigame. So this is like, there's 2 of these in the game. Both of them there are 2 arcade machines that kind of have these side-scroller platformers in them, and they're usually pretty interesting. However, since this run has no restrictions on what we're allowed to do outside of the combat difficulty, I'm playing this on normal difficulty, so it needs to stay... The combat difficulty needs to stay on normal, but since this isn't a combat session, I can change the difficulty in this minigame to God mode, where I'm invincible, I have infinite air dash, and yeah, it kind of just trivializes the whole thing. This is usually a great time to read, like, any announcements or donations, as it's just kind of a minute of me holding a button with no real threat that can stop me at any point. But that's the end of the minigame already. And we need to do this to get a very important item. Alright, so now once that's over, the force field blocking this key is gone, so we can grab the deep key, which is incredibly important to getting an item for the side quest. And speaking of the side quest, we're actually gonna get to that really soon. So, I just have one more stop before I go ahead and do that, and that is to go get this TV from this far-off island. This TV is one of the most notable in the game. This TV contains Charge Up, which is a skill that lets you charge to perform a empowered version of each character's character-specific skill. I haven't mentioned this, but each character has a character-specific skill. I'll talk about more of them when we get into fights where we use them, but Charge Up gives us empowered versions of those skills. We're never going to use Charge Up in the run. Unfortunately, we're back to that kind of thing going on. We're just never going to use Charge, but you know, it is still all TVs. We need to collect every TV, even if we're not going to use it. And with that being done, we can actually go do probably the most interesting part of the run, in my opinion, and the main thing that makes this run different from any percent. We're going to go do the optional portion of the game. So in order to access this game's optional dungeon, I need to bring the Skull Bomb to the excavation site here. And usually to get access to the Soul Bomb, you need to get into the treasure vault, which I broke into at the beginning of the game. Usually that requires beating the game's third of its 4 story required bosses. So technically I'm 2 bosses early on this dungeon because I've already skipped the first boss, but yeah, we're entering this area way earlier than the game intends for us to. And it's a very strong area, which means if I have to fight anything in this area, I would probably die, but it's not too hard to avoid enemies here, and also it has some really strong gear as well, which will make going through the story bosses much quicker and easier once we actually get this area done. There is a reason we do this early. There is an optional boss in this area that we cannot fight. So initially it may seem a little bit silly to come here this early because we would have to take a second trip back to take on that boss fight, but we can get everything we need to do in this area for the story done without fighting that boss. So we just decided to take it on now. So this is the Sage Labyrinth. It's a very different part of the game. It's like this 3D maze type deal. And it's really weird to navigate. It's intentionally very, like, cryptic. But if you know where you're going, it's not hard. And all the enemies in here are on a cycle that always starts the same way. So as long as I, like, know where I'm going and do all my inputs right, it should not take any, like, extra time to do this. Like, there's no RNG that can mess me up in this part of the run, despite the fact that there are a lot of moving parts. You can see an enemy over here. And we're going to enter this hidden wall here, and we're going to get the Peptide Bodkins, which is a really good glove. In this game, there are 2 pieces of gear that you can put on each character. They have a glove, and then, like, I don't remember what the other one's called right now, but it's just kind of like a general, like, piece of clothing. And the glove usually has to do with your attack stat, while the piece of clothing has to do with your other extra stats. So we're still moving through here. There's going to be an enemy on my left. There it is. Alright. And we do need to take a quick detour here, too. Get a little bit of a secret. So I'm going to go in this hidden wall, and that's going to let us get on top of this wall, which we moved with that light switch earlier. And I can go up this hidden path. I can get the looped dome, which pretty much just makes any character I want into a tank. It lowers your speed by 25, but increases your health and MP, or your flesh and will, rather, by 50. So, yeah, again, you can just make whoever you want a tank. And one of the gloves I got in the Hidden Treasure Vault just makes a character demonstrably fast. So you can just kind of use that on the same character using the looped dome, and it cancels out the downside of the looped dome. But, real quick, I'm going to just do a small bit of menuing before using the crystal to work back up to the top of the ladder here. I did get one other gear piece when I talked to the sage there to get the second sage token of the run, which is I got the single glove, which is a glove that makes you... that's pretty strong and makes you pretty fast, and also makes every gesture or skill you use cost half of its will, or half of its MP. So it's really good. We don't really use it for that effect, though. We just kind of use it for the speed and power, but it's just like a neat little side effect. So coming up is the boss that I mentioned would kill me if I even tried looking at it. So you might wonder how I'm going to get through this boss and still do everything I want to do in this area in one visit. It turned out if you just open your menu while walking onto the tile where the boss event would usually start, it just doesn't start. So that little weird menu open and close I did while moving there is actually what skipped the entire boss fight for me. Now I have an extra stored menu. It's going to go away when I go through a loading zone, but it just would, you know, take me a second to close it, and I don't need to. So now we're out of the final, like the hidden dungeon of the game. We have everything we need from there, both for story progression and good items. And it's finally time for us to take on our first fights of the run. So heading over to story progression here, we're getting into the second major area of the game, the Juice Ranch and the Worm Pod. And this is like the only area of the game that doesn't really have like a known skip glitch associated with it outside of a cutscene skip at the end of the second boss. So before we get into the first fight here, I'm going to mention a few things. I'm going to grab this TV, Fate Sandbox. We're going to use this one once. And before I get into the fight, I'm going to sneak along the wall here and grab the leather gauge from the fridge here, which is just the glove that makes you pretty fast. And then we're going to get into this fight. So when I teleported to Wayne House after that first fight of the run, I used the bathtub to make myself clean. I mentioned this game has a lot of status effects in it. Clean is a status effect that makes you immune to negative status effects for the first few turns of the battle. And bathtubs always full heal you and give you clean whenever you interact with them, so they're very good. The reason we need clean for this fight is because, as you see on the right, at the start of this fight, the enemy on the far right, every time you hit it, it counter attacks with sleeping spores, which puts every enemy on the field, or not just every enemy, every person on the field to sleep at once. And that can be kind of scary, so since we use the clean from the bathtub, we actually just, you know, get all the enemies to fall asleep without having any of my party members fall asleep, with the exception of Samsnosa, who is not clean because they were not technically in my party before this fight. They are just a new recruit. And now we have Samsnosa in our party, and we can move on to the second boss of the game. I'm going to grab one piece of equipment here that's really helpful, the Rancher Poncho, and then I'm going to do a little bit of equipment here. Alright. Alright, there we go. So now all of our characters are set up and really strong. I equipped all those things I mentioned. Rancher Poncho gives whatever character has it some extra health and a little bit of speed. I mentioned the telescopic sleeve and loop dome. Organ Port is just a really solidly consistent piece of clothing that we get from the treasure vault, same as the telescopic sleeve. And the last important gear piece to mention is one that I got, the first one that I actually got in the Sage Labyrinth, which is the Peptide Bodkins. Is a glove that gives you a lot of good, like a pretty decently good power stat, but its most important attribute is that it actually applies poison on Snap, which snapping is just your basic hit. So that is just, you know, yet another damage over time effect that I have now that I don't even need to use any will to cast, so it's super strong, and I can make good use of it on any boss fight where I just attack someone, which, I mean, is going to be all of them, you know. Point of a boss fight is to defeat it. So coming up to the first boss of the run, the second one of the game, the first one we actually fight, I'm going to set up a menu storage coming into this fight so that we can skip a cutscene after it. This is Fonthitropine. Fonthitropine is annoying in any percent. This is like the biggest run killer. In this category, it's mostly consistent, but there is still like a small problem that can occur if things don't go your way. First thing I do in this fight is just set up a few of the damage over times, And this is actually the only fight in either category right now, any percent or all TVs, where we do not have all 4 characters faster than the boss. Pongorma is actually slower than the boss with his current gear setup here, and that's, like, fine, because we want to manipulate this boss's health fairly accurately. The first turn, he used Accelerate, which made him fast, and when the boss here is fast, he will do 2 actions per turn. But at a certain gate of health that I believe is at 160, the boss will actually get angry, which will make his attacks more powerful, and that's very annoying. So on the second turn, we use Fate Sandbox, the newest skill we picked up, which makes whatever party member is hit with the Fate Sandbox immune to bad status abilities, and then we use that turn to cast the Lightning with Pongorma, and Lightning is his really strong character-specific skill, and that puts him into the angry HP range at a... it puts him in the angry HP range at a point where he is pretty much guaranteed to always... what am I trying to say here? Where he's pretty much always guaranteed to die before you do, because he will either use his AoE attack, which wakes the whole party up, or he'll either use his AoE attack, which wakes the whole party up, or he'll die to damage over times before he can kill the full party, which is really helpful. So, I messed up the cutscene skip that we usually try and do after that fight there. For some unknown reason, there are a few cutscenes where the menu is invisible when you're trying to cutscene skip them. We don't know why and what the distinction is, but that's one of them. Unfortunately, due to a little bit of a reroute that I did recently, I was not correct in my memory of where the mini crystal was in the invisible menu, so I was unable to do the cutscene skip properly, but that's probably the least important cutscene skip in the run. And I can move on to the next part of the game just fine. So, heading into the third area of the game, Fog Blast here, I'm going to do a quick menu once the game loads. I'm going to unequip both items on Samsnosa, give them to Dedesmoln, and then give both of Dedesmoln's items to Samsnosa, and then I can hit this NPC here for a full heal. So now I should be full healed for the next boss fight. Yes, we don't plan to do another fight until the next boss fight again. Only real pit stop I need to take in Fog Blast before getting to the end of the area is to get the clicker so we can get the TV here. This TV has Link Mollusk, which is a really interesting skill that we will probably only get to... It's weird. It's likely that we use it on the upcoming boss. There are like 5 outcomes that can happen on turn 1 of the next boss fight, and in 3 of those outcomes we use that skill, and in the other 2 we never see Link Mollusk in the run. But we'll get there when we get there. For now, we're going to do our first mini crystal jump in a little while, actually. We're going to skip finding the key for this drawbridge by just jumping in midair and making it to the palace. And now that, well, it seems like we're in the palace, we're gearing up to the third boss fight here. We're not quite. We have one other thing we need to do, and that thing does cause quite a major detour. So while I'm down in the basement here, I am going to go hit this switch, which is required for, you know, dropping the force field that gives us access to the boss fight. But I'm also, that was a little bit scary, I'm going to drop down here, because there's a hole in the ground here, and that leads us to an area that has just like a massive invisible path. This place isn't too hard to navigate in the run. You just kind of dash upwards until you get to these stairs, and that gives us the third and final sage token. So that's the end of this little like hidden area stuff where we get these tokens, and that gives us access to get the final TV when we go to the area where you can access it, because you need to get 3 sage tokens to like power up the TV, and that's how you learn the final skill. But unfortunately, as a side effect of having to do that skip the way we did, or not do the skip the way we did, but having to go get the Sage token, since that acts as a loading zone, there's no way to get back to the palace other than just doing the bridge key skip again. And now it's time for the third fight here. So this fight, as I mentioned, is really interesting. Not just because the entire fight route changes depending on what happens turn 1, but also because this fight's dynamic is just really interesting. So this is a duel fight. Each enemy has 400 HP. And there's a bit of a dynamic between these two. So the one on the right is wrapped in this like shield, and as you can see, when the shield is unwrapped at the end of the turn, Adozier, the character on the left, will always use rewrap to put the character on the right back in their shield. Because of the turn order we got, we can actually use this skill that I mentioned, Link Mollusk. It gives every debuff that the using character has to the enemy. So I just gave Vulnerable and Leaking, which is a damage over time and a debuff that causes double damage to both of the enemy characters. And I'm going to pair this with Pongorma's character-specific lightning skill, which, as I mentioned earlier, is like a giant damage nuke skill, to deal over 100 damage to Carcero, the thing on the right, at once. So as you see, I just dealt 108 damage. So at this point, he's gonna die, unfortunately, because he got targeted twice in a row. But I can just go ahead and triple hit Adozier here, and to be safe, I'm going to use Soul Crisper just to re-up one of his damage over times, but he should die at the end of this turn. Both characters should die at the end of this turn to their damage over times, and that's the end of the fight. So yeah, that fight can go quite a few different ways depending on who gets hit by what attack on turn 1. That's one of the better outcomes for this fight. And that lets us move on to the last part of the game here. So I'm going to set up one last cutscene skip for the run. However, this one's going to take a little bit before we do something with it, because this cutscene that's happening right now is actually not what we want to skip. This is a pretty short cutscene that leads to a forced loss fight. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just use the ability in our combat menu to just end a fight. And as soon as the cutscene starts, I'm going to just mini crystal out of that fight, and that unlocks the final dungeon. And I don't have to watch the giant, like, minute-long cutscene of the dungeon starting. Now, usually after the dungeon, we get put into this area, or after the cutscene, we get put into this area. This is the Afterlife, and it's a mechanic in both Hylics games. Pretty much when you die, you go to an Afterlife area where enemies in this game drop meat, and you can put the meat in this meat grinder here to increase your max HP. So, we do have to come here manually because we skip the cutscene that usually, like, takes us right here, but trust me, that cutscene is so long, it's still faster. So I take the time to increase my max HP before going to the Afterlife to grab this TV, which has another skill we're never going to use, I'm sorry. But that is the second to last TV. We only have one more TV we need to grab, and that is the final TV with the ultimate skill, and we have all the pieces to get it. We just need to go there before heading to the final dungeon. So I'm going to go to the little dock here to call my airship one last time to the port, and then we're going to head up to this giant airship in the sky, which is... I activated this thing coming out of the ocean after I hit that switch after skipping the secret boss. It gives me access to this secret area, which has a lot of good gear in it, and once again, access to the ultimate skill, which I'm going to use. So, let me think of everything we got. We got Permableb, the healing skill I never used. We got Soul Crisper, which is incredibly useful. We got Time Sigil and Charge Up, 2 skills I never used. Nematode Interface, which is really good. Fate Sandbox and Link Mollusk, which are both really good. And then we got Teledenudate from the Afterlife. So that's 8 TVs. This one is going to be 9th. And that is the correct number. There are 9 TVs in this game, so... As soon as I I'm forgetting the word, but use that TV. As soon as I interact with that TV, it gives us the final skill in the game, Bombogenesis, and we can head on to the final dungeon. So, Bombogenesis is a really interesting skill. I am not going to be using it in the final boss. It could be faster, but this route was very recently formed. A lot of the skips used in this run were very recently made, so routing has not been fully stressed yet, and there's a chance that it could be faster to use it in the final boss, but I have not been using it yet. The reason why I'm a little bit hesitant on it is because Bombogenesis does its damage calculation based on the amount of will or MP in the party, and we don't get any upgrades for that in this run, so it's naturally not going to do as much damage as it could in like a full hundo, like get everything in the game run. So heading into the final dungeon, I just defined a giant skip. I kind of used a soft lock prevention method in the game, that if you're like hugged up against a wall and stuck in an airborne position, the game will eventually just put you in a grounded state if it considers you stuck in the air. And I use it to kind of climb that slanted wall, and the reason I do that is because of the switch that I just hit for climbing that wall. Pretty much skips the whole dungeon. I'm going to do one other skip to just skip getting one of these keys here, but pretty much the idea of this dungeon is you usually have to get a key to open the door that I just skipped, climb all the way up the dungeon to drain a pool at the bottom of the dungeon, and then you have to use the drain pool to hit the switch that I hit. So by just doing the jump to hit that switch early, it skips like me climbing all the way up and back down the dungeon, and it lets me get this key without going up the dungeon twice. I can do it on my first run up, and this key is what gives me access just directly to the final boss's room. So I'm gonna open the final boss's room here and just jump in. So this boss is a little bit interesting because they can be tricky with their attack pattern. Pretty much this boss, as you're about to see, whenever they get hit by an attack, a direct attack, like a skill or a snap, they are going to summon a minion as a counterattack. And that's not good. These minions are really annoying. They love healing Gibby, both on his health and his status effects. They can do a lot of damage to you when we don't really have that much health at this point in the game, and they're overall just very frustrating to deal with. Gibby has a little bit of an AI thing where the attack that he does is dependent on how many of his minions are on the field. So he's going to use... There are kind of two variants of this fight, depending what he does turn one. But pretty much the entire crux of this fight is based on an attack that we're definitely going to be seeing at the end of this turn called Killer Trees. Killer Trees is a AoE attack that has a little bit of a gate designed into it so that it should never kill from certain health thresholds. So no character, as long as I play the fight right, should ever die to Killer Trees, but it also has the benefit of just auto-exploding every of the minions on the field. So as you saw, as soon as he used Killer Trees, every progeny, is what the minions are called, just exploded without getting an action on the turn. That's kind of the whole idea of this fight. Whenever he has 3 or less progenies on the field, he is less likely to go for Killer Trees, near impossible for him to go to Killer Trees, actually. But whenever he has 4 or more minions on the field, he's actually fairly likely to go for it. So we kind of use that to make sure we're not eating the stupidly powerful, make sure we're not eating the stupidly powerful AoE attack every turn, but that he's still doing it regularly enough to where the minions that he summons never get their turn. I also use a healing item I got in the secret area called the multi-stem cell. The stem cell is a fairly weak healing item that applies a pretty actually useful status effect of regenerating, which just heals you a little bit at the start of your turn. The reason this is so good is because it just makes it so a character like won't die. It's not too useful as opposed to other healing items in this version of the fight, because we're kind of at the point where we're ready to kill him anyways, and with the amount of just raw damage that our damage over time effects do here, he should be good to just, like, pack it up and die any second now. But there is a potential on this route of the fight, because I used 4 attacks turn 1, he summoned 4 minions turn 1, that he does do Killer Trees turn 1, and even just a chance he does Killer Trees twice in a row right here. And if you get, like, any of those instances where he does this attack multiple times in a row, it's really nice to have the regenerating effect for that reason. But if he doesn't, then you don't really need them. Thankfully, I got to show off a scenario where they are pretty useful. But that being said, I'm just going to keep defending here, and at the end of the turn, Gibby is going to die to his own damage over times without actually spawning any progenies. And that's going to be the end of Gibby. Time isn't necessarily immediately after Gibby dies. There is a small little bit of gameplay leading up to the ending cutscene before the run ends, but this is the end of, like, any notable gameplay for the run. So yeah, after that cutscene's over, we just fall down here into this area and move down this way, and then we have to go up this bridge path, and time is going to be when we hit this button. And that's time. So, pretty good run, pretty good showcase of the route. This route is actually fairly consistent right now. Like I mentioned, it has the potential to change because a lot of the stuff in it is new and not fully tested. But the point of this route that I made for this category with all the new skips was just kind of to make every boss have pretty much an 100% success rate, which, again, obviously there's maybe a few things that we can work on, but in any percent, there's a lot of bosses that can just kind of kill your run if they feel like it, and you can't do anything about it. So it's really nice that this category is able to show off everything in the game fairly consistently. The only thing you really have to mess up is, since I didn't show this off, but since this game has no run button, if you get into an enemy encounter, you are very upset. Your run is just over on the spot. And in a marathon setting, I'm usually gonna be dropping more saves, and the autosaves in this game are pretty generous, but you don't always want to be relying on those. You just really want to avoid any enemy encounter if you can. This game is super cool, though. Obviously, it just looks super cool. It plays super fun. The character design, the art, the music is all incredible. And it's all made by, like, one dude, with the exception of the music in this game is made by another dude. But, yeah, Hylics 2 is incredible, and I really hope whatever marathon sees this, you give it a shot, because I think it's really entertaining. I think the run is really well paced, and I think it's just a great time, the whole game. I'm gonna let this cutscene play out, but thank you so much.